Good morning, everyone. I'm going to ask one of the most usual questions of the Corona times. Can you hear me? I hope you can. We just checked it with our event manager, so that should be fine. Thank you for confirming that in the chat. So my name is Sanna Alaranta. I work at Lux Innovation, which is the innovation agency for Luxembourg. We are also the national contact point for the New Horizon Europe program for Luxembourg. And this is the reason organizing this webinar. We are organizing a series of webinars on the new, recently launched Horizon Europe program. Before I start, so really nice to see so many of you online. We are most of us, we are in our home offices, so am I, due to COVID. And COVID is indeed also in today what we discussed, and in cluster 2, which is the focus of today's program, is an important feature. We are adapting to that. And very nice that you are saying a few words in the chat. That gives a more of a human touch to this digital event. We will have a Q&A reserved for the end of the webinar, and I would like you to ask you to use the questions part of the webinar tool that you should see on the right. You have chat and questions normally. So please use that, and we will pick up those questions at the end. Without further ado, I think that was the main thing about more or less the housekeeping rules. For the agenda, I tried to be rather brief. I don't want to overflow you with information, and we are there for more specific information. You are always welcome to come to us. So the aim today is giving you an overview, giving you an understanding also how to read the Horizon Europe program, the different work programs, the different parts, give you an ideas how to start there, and understanding of what exactly is in, for instance, the cluster 2, without going too much into details. So firstly, I will have a very brief Horizon Europe overview, not going too much into detail. We have had our Luxembourg launch event, and the webinar or the recordings are online on our website, so you can check those for having more details on the overview. Then we will focus more on the cluster 2, which is the creative and cultural heritage, creative industries, and inclusive societies specific work program. Here we will have an overview, and I will then go through the 3 different destinations that you have, so 3 different areas that you have under the work program. Finally, very briefly, I will say a few words on the so-called social sciences integration. So throughout the whole program, keep in mind that there are more possibilities, opportunities. It's actually important that social sciences and humanities are present in the whole program, so in other clusters, in other areas. And of course, a reminder of our NCP services. And finally, a Q&A. Depending on the time, and actually if a certain colleague of mine is online, I might, if we have the time, we might have a bit deeper look on societal SSH in the digital topics at the end, but that depends on the timing. So I think, I hope that was clear and you're following and you know what to expect. By the way, I hope there will be not much disturbances. doorbell bell ringing or dog barking, but if there is, please forgive me. And also, I forgot to say, so besides that, I am a national contact point for the Cluster 2, so the culture, creativity, and inclusive society. In Horizon Europe, I'm also following the climate, energy, and mobility cluster. Yes. So this is on the slide. You should see a picture that most likely is already familiar to you. Is the new Horizon Europe structure. It's evolution, not revolution, from Horizon 2020. You can see some changes there. I will not go into that too much. Today's focus is on, so look at the pillar 2, the global challenges and the European industrial competitiveness, and the second cluster, culture, creativity, and inclusive society. So we will be focusing there. However, already to remind you at this point, for the SSH integration overall, the program, please do keep in mind that, and you can always come back to us to ask for instance, the climate, energy, and mobility work program details and topics that might be of relevance to you also. I also wanted to remind you, some of you might have followed our Horizon Europe launch event. For the advanced session, we spent some time on what is the policy framework, what are the main aims for the new framework program for research for Europe. And so here in very short way, you can see, so we are talking about an economy that works for people. The emphasis from Horizon 2020 in rhetorics has changed from more or less focusing on jobs and growth and competitiveness to this economy that works for people, and twin transition, which means the green and the digital transition, as well as what is very important, and especially for you, for SSH research, SSH projects, the sustainable development goals of the United Nations. So this is in a nutshell. Keep this in mind whenever it is relevant for you, for your proposals. Dig what is inside the Green Deal strategy for Europe, what is inside the digital, and dig deeper also with the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and think where your proposal, where your project makes an impact there. I have also an arrow there. We had an agreement on the MFF, so the multi-annual financial framework for the EU in December, so including also the Horizon Europe program. So we have roughly 95.5 billion euros to achieve those green digital goals and SDGs. Then on the program, I wanted to give you the keywords, the kind of new keywords, the new glossary, to put you in this new mindset. I know it might take some time to learn from Horizon 2020, to learn a bit changed new glossary and logic. This slide is from the Commission, actually copied from the Commission, and it gives the logic of the impact, the glossary. So how from the so-called strategic plan of the whole program, where you have the policy priorities as mentioned, so the Green Deal, digital age, economy that works for people, which then translates into these key strategic orientations for research and innovation. So where the research and innovation investments are expected to make a difference, which then comes down to expected impacts. And there you have a link to destinations. Destination is also a new word for Horizon Europe. We talked about previously, maybe it was call or call areas, more or less. Now we talk about destinations, and these destinations are linked to expected impacts. And then we go towards the work programs. So from destinations that are on the work programs to topics with expected outcomes and expected outputs, and keeping that glossary in mind. So hopefully this slide helps you a little bit to see how things are linked to each other. So if you look at the first line of these balloons, you have the strategic plan. So the policy objectives, the strategic orientations, the expected impacts. Then you go, the second line is on the work program, how the work program is constructed. So you have on the work program, you have the destinations that are linked to the expected impact in the strategic plan. Under the destinations, you have topics. And here, what I would like to say here also, for you to understand when you read the work program, that this has, so the structure of the work program and the topics has changed from Horizon 2020 a little bit. So you have first actually conditions of the topic, then you have expected outcome, and then you have the scope, which includes also normally the challenge and then the expected scope. Here I have also highlighted, so keep this in mind, this logic. Impact is very, very important. And keep this in mind. So I have yellow circles around more or less what you need to remember. Of course, from scope, expected impacts of outcomes of the topic. Go to the destination. What is expected there? Actually, it gives you a very nice idea. It actually gives you also advice, tips, and I have tried to list those here in this presentation as well later on. Look at the work program, what it asks, what it says, how it frames the destinations, and see what is asked there as well. And then go to the expected impacts and keep that in mind when preparing your proposals. So, hope that wasn't too complicated. You can always come back to us if it was. Now going into, as promised, into the cluster 2, so culture, creativity, and inclusive society. And here I have prepared a short overview of the whole cluster. Some main recent changes, the overall logic and overview of what it actually, what is inside, the budgets, etc. And then I will go through the destinations. We have 3 different destinations under the cluster 2. As a reminder, so here I put, this is actually from when you look at the overall introduction of the work program, there is a very important message for you. Several of them, for instance, on synergies with other programs. So please do read that, check that very well. But here I wanted to remind of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. The work program specifically tells you to pay attention, think how your project will contribute to achieving the UN SDGs. Here I have the SDGs that are specifically important for cluster 2, but you are not at all limited to this. Please look beyond. And as we know, the UN Sustainable Development. So sustainable development means environmental, economic, and social pillars. And so it's very relevant. And please consider also the economic, of course the social, but the economic and environmental pillars, as also in the Green Deal, for instance. And now here I have, in a very brief overview, how the work program is actually constructed in terms of the different destinations. So you have one destination on democracy and governance. You have one focusing on cultural heritage and CCI, which means creative and culture industries. And this is actually something, how would I say, compared to Horizon 2020, there is an increased relevance and importance of the cultural heritage and CCI in Horizon Europe under the Cluster 2. And I will talk a little bit more about that later on. And then finally, you have the transformations destination. So more or less, I think you can recognize here also it's been evolution and not revolution from the Horizon 2020, the last work program. So you can, over the course of this webinar, you can see that there are a lot of familiar themes, and we are, of course, building on what has already been done. Briefly, an overview of the work program. And here I would like to make a disclaimer that we are at the end game of preparing, finalizing the work programs, but it's still a draft. Here I try to put in bullet points. My apologies for having so much just text on this slide. But here in bullet points, some things that I wanted to convey to you as kind of important overall messages or changes and principles maybe of the work program. So firstly, as I mentioned about the MFF decision, it was very good news for Cluster 2, because previously, if you're aware a little bit of the work program development, we had a budget that was 1.2 billion euros, more or less. And it wasn't that much better than in Horizon 2020. And as I think, if you have applied to Horizon 2020, you know that the Societal Challenge 6, so the predecessor of Cluster 2 in Horizon 2020, was one of the most competitive societal challenges because of the small budget and because a lot of very good SSH research done in Europe. However, now we have good news. And this increase is really significant for us because it nearly, I mean, it's a 1 billion euros more, so nearly doubling the budget for Cluster 2. So that is excellent for us. However, the additional funding, that's the increase that we gained, is not available yet in 2021 topics. It will be only available from 2022. And because of that, some 2021 topics that we previously had in the work program have been shifted to 2022. The logic for that was that the idea was to follow the kind of good practice that we have from Horizon 2020 for the then Societal Challenge 6 topics, to have 10 million euros for the research and innovation actions, meaning 3 projects normally to be funded, and 3 to 3.5 million euros for the coordination and support actions. You can also see the overall funding for the 2 years. So you can clearly see there is a significantly more budget for the 2022 topics. In the work program, this is a little bit different from the Societal Challenge 6 last work program. In this one, we have only so far research and innovation actions and coordination and support actions. Possibly it's still possible to change maybe for the 22, but this is the case now. Mostly they are RIAs, only a few CSAs. And as I said, there is clearly a bigger emphasis on cultural heritage and CCIs, so the culture and creative industries, versus Horizon 2020. And perhaps this is also the reason and how these sectors have suffered from COVID, why there was this significant increase in the budget as well. For cluster 2, I wanted to also mention, because as said, I'm following cluster 5, where the situation has been quite different. There is no missions, so the missions that are a novelty in Horizon Europe. I'm sure you've heard about them, and I will not go too deeply into that. There are no missions nor partnerships linked to the work program, which is why actually the development of the work program has been earlier than for a lot of other clusters. So I hope I'm not too fast and you're still there. After that news flash of the overall development of the work program, I will go into the first destination, innovative research on democracy and governance. And here I tried to put in one slide the main overview of the whole destination. So destination 1 has 2 calls, one for 2021 and one for 2022. You have for 21 5 topics. All of them are research and innovation actions, and with 50 million euros of total budget. 22, we have 9 topics, so more, as said, all research and innovation actions and 81 million euros of total budget. In the little word cloud you see here, you can see more or less the main, sorry, I lost a bit the presentation. You can see the topics kind of in a summary. So you have democracy in the, for instance, the EU neighborhood. You have democracy and media and social media. I think there was 2 topics, one on social media more and one on media. You have feminism and democracy. You have AI and big data. You have education. You have civic participation for democracy, economic models, and future of democracy, and political extremism and global governance. So more or less these words summarize the topics that we have inside the calls. Moving forward. In the work program, you can see that what is defined for the different destinations are the challenges that we want to address. Here, I think we don't need to go through that too much. I think we all also know those challenges for democracy that we have not just in Europe, but globally as well. Sorry, I'm again lost with my presentation a bit. So moving forward. And as mentioned, so you remember from the strategic plan, you have the expected impact that is often then linked, that are linked to the destinations. And for destination one, this one on the slide is the expected impact that you should keep in mind for all the topics. So reinvigorating the democratic governance, improving the accountability, transparency, effectiveness, and trustworthiness of rule of law-based institutions and policies, and including active and inclusive citizenship with safeguarding the fundamental rights. A few tips for destination one, what you should keep in mind for your proposal. This is not all, and I'm happy to discuss with you more in detail, but just a few blocks that to build your proposals to keep in mind. So of course, keep the focus on what is said in the overall destination and the as said in the expected impact. Focus on really evidence-based innovations, policies, and recommendations. For linked to that, also, it's important to consider who are the people who are impacted by the innovations, the policies, and policy recommendations. So you should consider those groups, and already when building the proposal, include thinking of citizen engagement to provide a change that is lasting. Here I also wanted to say to keep in mind the twin transition, the digital, as you saw, there were topics related to digital, but overall keep in mind the twin transition, the green and the digital. And what was specifically mentioned is a high transparency and openness, which is highly recommended. Here, meaning that already in the research process, you consider being as transparent and open as possible. Going to destination two, sorry, I hope you're following. So we covered destination one very briefly, going to destination two, which is this focus on cultural heritage and the CCIs. And why we have this part in the cluster two. There is an importance of cultural heritage and CCIs. And by the way, for this part, it's for Horizon Europe, it's important to remember or to realize that for cluster two, cultural heritage means both the tangible and the intangible heritage. Why I say this is because in Horizon 2020, the conservation, preservation of tangible heritage cluster, cultural heritage, was more under the Societal Challenge 5, which had, for instance, raw materials, green technologies, etc. And it's important to remember that now that this is also under cluster 2, which gives a little bit more of interdisciplinarity aspect. So you should consider in some of the topics, especially the, for instance, green technologies. So why we want to address cultural heritage is, of course, that because it has a value in itself, but it has a lot of other values and potential for us, for our societies. For instance, representing of our values and help to shape, present, and build our future. What is important also is that access, and this is an important aspect in this destination is the access, creating better access to the CCIs, the cultural heritage, which then can contribute to better social cohesion, which is, of course, one of the overall ideas of the cluster 2. It creates better inclusion, and as mentioned, COVID-related, strengthens resilience and sense of belonging and improves people's well-being. This is how cultural heritage and CCIs are perceived. And one aspect that is mentioned also, and you can see this in specifically some of the topics that the cultural heritage and CCIs for Europe have an interest, because with that we can promote European interest across the world, and also that at the moment we are and want to keep the kind of leading position in terms of cultural heritage and culture and creativity. Here in one slide again, the overview of Destination 2, more or less the practical side on the little box on the left side. So here you actually have 3 calls, 2 calls addressing this first 2021. So research and innovation on cultural heritage and CCIs. You have 4 topics, again, all research and innovation actions with 45 million total budget. And you have another call for 21, which actually focuses, it's perhaps, well, it is not really for you necessarily, it's engagement with stakeholders, and here you have 2 topics, both CSAs, so coordination support actions, one actually to create a network of NCPs, of my colleagues in Europe, and secondly, looking to the possibility of creating partnership under Horizon Europe for cultural heritage. 2022, we have again a lot more of topics. We have 10 topics with 9 research and innovation actions and 1 CSA, and 92.8 million euros of total budget. Here, what I wanted to mention was also that under Destination 2, there is a little bit more budget per topic for some of the research and innovation actions, because it's considered, like I mentioned, there are some topics that are related more to digital technologies or green technologies, so it's considered that you need a little bit more budget than you would need for more traditional SSH research actions. Here you can see on the right side, I tried again to kind of summarize the topics without going too much into detail. Actually, the size of the symbols here, they represent a little bit the amount of topics that you have per the thematic. So we do have, if I remember correctly, 4 topics that look into, so both in 21 and 22, look into more the protection, conservation, restoration, preserving, and enhancing cultural heritage. This is the part where usually you need to include digital technologies, green technologies. These are linked to the Green Deal, for instance, how there's a topic that looks at how climate change has an effect on our tangible cultural heritage, and so on and so forth. I do believe that there was also, if I remember correctly, there was a topic on looking at how protecting the endangered languages in Europe. Then very important aspect of the CCIs is that is considered, or the work program wants to lift the role of CCIs, the unused potential as driver for innovation and competitiveness of other sectors, which I find interesting. While there are also then topics looking at the innovation and competitiveness inside the CCI sector, if that makes sense. For instance, you have two topics specifically looking at the challenge that we have, especially for the music and film industry in Europe, that while we have a lot of quantity and quality, we are not as competitive as our competitors. So there are two topics looking, one on film industry and one on music ecosystem in Europe. Then we look at how CCI's cultural heritage, what an effect and promotion, how it promotes the European values, a more traditional SSH topic, I would say. Then you have a specific focus on traditional crafts, and if we could have new approaches while keeping the traditions that we have. And here looking at, again, digital technologies as well. Games and culture is also one topic in the work program. And I think finally mentioning the management and sustainable financing. So here the idea is to look at, especially now with following the post-crisis from COVID, how we could have more innovative, participative management approaches and sustainable financing for cultural institutions. Hope I'm being clear and you're still following. I might need to speed up a little bit. Here, so challenge for the cultural heritage, I think this is more or less clear. So the awareness of arts is still limited in scope and impact. We have a number of challenges that our cultural heritage is facing, whether it's more on the tangible side of climate change, pollution, damage, natural or man-made disasters, or more on the illegal trafficking and the lack of finance and valorization. As you could see, that's clear in the topics as well, that this challenge is being addressed. And as said, especially for the film and music industry, we are lacking behind. For the objectives, so there is actually no specific expected objective for this area coming from the strategic planning. However, here I gathered, summarized what are the general objectives of this destination 2. So clearly, of course, the protection part, really looking at the inbuilt innovation potential, and beyond that, towards other sectors, what can be the economic role of CCIs, and CCI intervention into innovation process, looking at new ways of management and business models for cultural institutions, and yes, valorizing the cultural heritage in terms of traditional skills and reusing the existing assets. It's a bit of repetition, but that helps to learn and keep in mind. Finally, for destination 2, I gathered again advice and tips for you when you build your project specifically, your proposal specifically for this part. Very important, as it is not just for this destination, but to engage with stakeholders and citizens. Consider also involving the relevant local, regional, national, European authorities and different social partners. You should really focus on the research outcomes. You remember also from the glossary, to create a clear strategy for the uptake of the research outcomes. Training and education. This is reminded in the work program as well, to keep in mind that you should plan a very targeted training and education activities for your proposals. And build, as the work program build on the research that is already there. Use the Cordis database, use other databases to build on research that is already there and technology that is already available. And here, as we are often cross-disciplinary, so do a good do a good research on that. Include participation of creatives, so the creative culture industry, the SMEs. Here for Luxembourg, we have a great creative cluster here at Lux Innovation, so keep that in mind for that part as well. As said, and as you know, the lessons learned from COVID-19 crisis, especially for this sector, is very important for a more resilient, sustainable management. And keep in mind how your projects can contribute to the Green Deal as well as SDGs. Of course, the digital as well, but especially in this part, it was highlighted to keep in mind the Green Deal and SDGs. Whoa. I think we have to rush a little bit, but that's also fine that we are now in the last destination, which is destination 3, innovative research on social and economic transformations. So here I first took up the challenges that were kind of more specifically mentioned. So, you know, we are in transition, and that's what the Horizon Europe wants to drive, is the green and digital transition. But the role of SSH is often then, SSH research is often then to look at the possible challenges that these transitions can pose. These challenges are often complex and interconnected and multidimensional. So this is one of the huge challenge of that this work program tries to look at. We are seeing an increase in inequality, poverty, and social exclusion. And this is, of course, then a threat for our cohesion, for our economic growth and well-being. And it is important to keep in mind the challenge of the magnifying impact of the COVID-19 crisis. And here also linked to this, how to achieve, and I should have emphasized the word just, green transition. If you are familiar with the Green Deal strategy, one main concept, important concept there is the just transition. And you might want to check how that is supposed to be achieved. There is more the cohesion regional policy there, but this part of this destination 3 is addressing that challenge. How do we achieve a green transition that is also just to people and regions and countries? Here, an overview of the destination 3 in more, let's say, practical details. So you have again 2 calls. First one for 21 is inclusiveness in times of change. You have 7 topics, mostly research and innovation actions, and 57 million of total budget. 22, a sustainable future for Europe. You have 10 topics, all research and innovation action, and again, bigger budget, so 90 million euros. Here you can see an overview then on the right side or a summary of the topics. I tried to kind of also reflect a little bit the size of the symbols here with how big the part is. So again, referring to Horizon 2020 and the previous work program there, we had an entire part focusing on migration. We don't have that in this work program, but we have migration topics under this destination three. I believe there were 4 to 5 migration topics for both 21 and 22. There was also more looking at maybe internal European mobility topic included as well. Then you have, as usual, you have a part of topics that looks at labor market, that looks at work and employment. You have social protection, you have the impacts of aging, you have, of course, inequality, you have education and skills, and also well-being. So this is in a nutshell. For the outcomes, what we are looking to achieve, I think this is also something we already covered, so I move on. Here, if you remember again from the strategic plan, the expected impact that this destination is addressing. It's there on the slide. So from this destination, the social and economic resilience and sustainability should be strengthened through a better understanding of the social, ethical, political, and economic impacts of the transformations of the change. And here, keep in mind also technology, globalization, demographics, mobility, and migration, and the interconnections. So this is to be kept in mind, that the guiding light impact for all the proposals, for all the topics. I'm running out of breath a little bit. Hope you are still there and following. We are nearing the end of the presentation. Here again, I gathered something for you to keep in mind for the destination 3. There are again tips and advices that you could see in the other parts as well. So the principles of resilience and just transition are important to keep in mind. Designing of policy strategies, as is very common also for SSH, for the cluster 2, for societal challenge 6 before. What is interesting to consider, especially for this part, is creating a feedback loop with stakeholders and policymakers, and consider integrating something like that within your proposals. And of course, include stakeholders that are affected by the policies. Then what is specifically asked as well is considering the political and the economical trade-offs of the recommendations that your project would produce. Going a bit beyond and looking at the contextual changes, what that might be needed, is also something that you should consider adding and considering. And as usual, valorize and build the experience and findings of previous research. As you know, there is a lot on these topics already done. Whoa. So we have more or less 10 minutes left. Let me check quickly. Oh, it's there. Okay, I don't see my colleague Géraud, but so as said, look beyond the cluster 2 for SSH relevance, because it is there. It's very important. Already you saw, maybe if you followed the final call of the Horizon 2020, which was the cross-cutting Green Deal call, where SSH was emphasized. We need this understanding, these disciplines to understand the changes and make the impact of research and innovation more visible and relevant for citizens and people. So keep in mind that social sciences, humanities are embedded throughout the program. This has been also monitored in Horizon 2020, and I think it will be done so in Horizon Europe also. So monitoring how much SSH is actually then integrated and how much funding goes to SSH researchers. We don't know yet so much about evaluation and how SSH will be considered in the other clusters, in the other topics. But you are needed, so keep that in mind. It will improve the quality of proposals to include the SSH researchers and research. Instead of listing topics from different clusters than other clusters than cluster 2, I did ask my colleagues to send me some topics, but I decided not to list them here. I have excellent colleagues who are following other parts of the program. So think where you would like to be involved in the other clusters, where you could provide your expertise and where is your interest, and come back to us, and we are happy to help you to identify the topics that might be relevant for you. We are there for you. Okay, I see Jero there making a comment. I don't know if we have the time because to take you on stage, but so maybe I read it here. So there is message from Jero that in cluster 4, so that's the digital space and industry cluster, especially a destination 6, human-centered and ethical development of digital and industrial technologies. And SSH is very much embedded, just as an example, but thank you, Jero, for that. So that's a good example. Jero is excellent. He knows his topics very well, and he can guide you if you're interested in the SSH in the digital part, or actually also the security part of the program. He's in charge of that. And a reminder quickly of our services. We are there for you. Please do come to us from the start. Start early, come to us. We are happy to help in any way we can with matching your ideas with the topics, to giving you ideas how to find partnerships, and any technical support we can. If you want, send us ideas for trainings that we could provide. We do critical proposal review. We give advice on legal and financial. And linked to that, I wanted to leave a few tips for you. I haven't been an NCP that long, but I've already seen that it's one of the key ingredients to start, to be successful, to start as early as possible. Now you know already the 2022 topics as well. And come to us early. Look for any help you can get also inside your organization, your institution. Don't try to go alone. There are also different platforms, the national contact point networks. And do remember to sign up for a newsletter, unless you are already there. Tell your colleagues about it. And to remind that we have more webinars coming up on the different clusters. And yes, do let us know your wishes. And now, rushing through, we have a few minutes left to questions, if you had any. I don't see any questions in the questions part. Hope it wasn't too confusing. And I know I rushed through, it's always a lot. For any specific details, do come back to me. And if it's about the other clusters that I'm not in charge of, I will direct you to my colleagues. But if no questions, I would like to thank you and wish you an excellent day and see you next time.